So a couple weeks ago, we put together a list of songs and we sent them to Ken to pick out 5 that told a story about his life and his work. I think it's time to hear the first one.
Okay, hit me.
They offered me the office, offered me the shop. They said I'd better take anything they got. Do you wanna make tea at the BBC? Do you really wanna be a cop? Career opportunity, the one that never knocked. Every job they offer used to keep you up the dock. Career opportunity, the one.
How'd you first hear it?
Obviously, that's The Clash, the only band that ever mattered, and was really my introduction to the first music that mattered to me. Everything else up to that point had just been like what I heard someone's brother play, or what kids in the neighborhood were listening to. And I always give a shout out and credit where credit was due. When I was, I think, 13 years old, Paul Howley was on my baseball team, made me a mixtape, and the whole first Clash album was on it, and it changed my life. And I just knew it was my music, And yeah, if he didn't hand me that tape, and everyone, especially people who are into punk rock, you usually were getting it from, the cool kid down the street, or your brother, or whoever, and Paul did that for me, and I'm forever grateful. And what I loved about songs, as a 13-year-old kid, you're like, and they're singing about being on the dole and, anti-government stuff. And you're like, I don't know what the hell they're talking about, but it's cool. But it made you want to look into that. And that's part of the things that led me into, many steps further down the road, being and wanting to know more about labor politics and just human rights in general. And so, yeah, that's how music affected me at a young age.
It's rebel music.
Hell yeah.
What did you want to rebel against at that age?
Oh, everything. My mother can tell you that. Everything. My poor mother. Thank you for being so kind to my mother out there. And yeah, my mother, saw me turn into, an angry teenager. She used to, I'll tell you a good story about my mother. So growing up, it was just me and my mother, and she cut hair out of our kitchen, and there was only one other room, and that was the living room, and that's where I would be trying to watch Bugs Bunny. And she had like 4 of those old-fashioned hair dryers with old ladies under it, And so needless to say, I wanted to take to the streets at an early age to get away from that. And so one day I was down the park, and I was, I think, 15, and I had just got my first tattoo. And my mother used to hit me with a hairbrush a lot, because, but I would always, no. Anyway, I would always fake that, no, not the hairbrush, Ma, because, it didn't hurt, but I didn't want her to know that. And one thing about having a mother that cuts all the other mothers in the neighborhood's hair is everything you do gets back to your mother. And so I was down the park with my shirt off. There was about 100 kids down there were playing hoop, and I thought I was the man. And my mother rolled up on me, sneak attack style, with the hairbrush in front of 100 kids, started hitting me with the hairbrush. And of course, I couldn't. I wanted to keep the charade alive, but I couldn't let my boys see that I was crying over being hit with a hairbrush. So she found out that day that the hairbrush no longer worked, and she got a larger weapon after that. It was a different time, folks,
This is just the type of history I was talking about earlier that I wanted people to know about. We need this kind of history. All right, we're going to hear the second song.
I like to walk in the summer breeze, down Darling Road by the dead old tree. I drink with my friends, the Hammersmith Broadway, the dirty, delightful old drunken old days. And the winter came down, and I loved it so dearly. The pubs and the bookies
was where you'd spend all your time. And the old man that was singing, when the roses bloom again and turn like the leaves to a new summertime. Now the winter comes down, I can't stand the chill that comes to the streets around Christmas time. I'm buggered to the nation, and I haven't got a penny to wander the dark streets of London.
Who is it?
The Pogues, the first single, one of my like proudest possessions, was the Dark Streets of London single by the Pogues. And, you know, the Pogues were fronted by the legendary songwriter Shane MacGowan, who in my opinion is the greatest songwriter of our time. He passed away last year, and, you know, I would, you know, if you were a young kid around here in the 80s, you know, and you wouldn't be able to escape Irish music, you know, from the family parties, bars, whatever. And then also being a punk rock fan, like when the Pogues came along, it seemed like, wait, is this band like made for me? You know, like this is my band. And I remember, you know, as someone who really never traveled or anything, didn't see much. I never really got to see much of the world at all ever until the privilege of the Dropkick Murphys taking me on that ride. But, you know, you'd hear, you know, the Pogues sing about the dark streets of London. And I want to know what London was all about, you know, fairy tale in New York, you know, and just how music could take you away to a far off place and kind of, you know, have dreams turn into someday hopes and realities that, you know, may come true. Shane MacGowan, we have a very storied history with. I first met Shane there was a Guinness Flower Festival at Suffolk Downs. It was like Van Morrison, Shane, his post-Pogues band, Shane and the Popes, and Elvis Costello. And I brought all my Pogue singles over, and Dropkick Murphys were a brand new band, and we were, you know, early on the bill. And I brought my Pogue singles, and I brought my Elvis Costello singles to get signed. And I saw Elvis Costello first, and I asked him to sign the stuff. And at the time, he was married to Kate O'Riordan, who was the bass player in the Pogues. So she was standing right there, and I said, "Would you mind signing my Pogue singles?" And she said, "I'd be happy to." And she signed all the Pogue singles. And then I went to Shane with all the Pogue singles, and Shane noticed that Kate O'Riordan, who he apparently was not on speaking terms with, had already signed all the singles. And he said no. And then he said, "I'll sign the one their first single that I had, because it was rare, the Dark Streets of London single." And he wrote, "To Ken, you effing wanker." Shane MacGowan. I just thought that was the coolest thing he could ever ask for. And then years later, you know, he would go on to record with us, and we would go on to tour with the Pogues in arenas across England and Ireland and Scotland. And, you know, it's just when a band has that kind of influence on you, and you get to meet them and get close to them, and it's crazy. You know, it's surreal. And I also might add, got to become friendly with Joe Strummer from The Clash before he passed away. So, man, music's taken me on a wild ride in that regard. So
It's a song of second generation Irish living in London. It's an immigrant song in a lot of ways. What was being Irish? How did being Irish shape your worldview and how you grew up?
I mean, first off, looking back on how impactful the Irish culture and immigration, the Irish immigration experience has been, not just on Boston, not just on America, but around the world. How the Irish have been welcomed with open arms, and they brought their culture and influence. And it's one of the main things that has taught me to be respectful of, you know, the immigrant experience in all walks of life. Because, you know, it was always kind of the focus of like, well, if you were welcomed here, by the way, we're all immigrants here, as we clearly realize, as we should, that if you came here and your family came here and built a better life, you don't get to close the door on the next group behind you. And that's always been my mentality.
The next song is from your very first album. And like you said, you've always been about this. When you see the divisions in the country, but particularly in your fan base, what do you think is driving that, given that you've held steady this whole time?
Obviously, people are using Republican, Democrat, liberal, far right, but it's really, in my view, as simple as the wealthy and the powerful want us divided, fighting amongst each other so they can steal it all out the back door. So that message of solidarity, you know, that has been such a strong voice for the labor movement needs to be the message of all people that worry about keeping a roof over their family's head, how they're going to make their next health insurance payment, how they're going to pay their student loans. That's what matters. We've been caring about our neighbors and not being divided. I just think that the message of Dropkick Murphys music from the start is more applicable today than it ever has been.
I agree. Let's hear the song.
1, 2, 3, 4. For the battle call, united we stand, divided we fall. Together we are what we can't be alone. We came to this country, we made it a home. This man so humble, this man so brave, a legend to many, he fought to his grave. Save family and friends from the hardship and horror in a land of depression. He gave hope for tomorrow. Say Johnny B. Boy, this one's for you.
I hate to stop that one. Together we are what we can't be alone. We came to this country. You made it our home. It's a song inspired by your grandfather. Tell us about him.
Like I said, unless you came over, on the Mayflower, or you were a native to this land originally, we were all part of that immigrant experience in one way or another. And that song is about my grandfather, my lovely mother's father, John Kelly. And my father died when I was really young, and he was that strong, real male role model in my life. And we had this thing where we'd come in, we'd have a lot of deep conversations. He had 2 heart attacks. My grandparents were living with me and my mother at the time. He wasn't supposed to be smoking, and I wasn't supposed to be drinking because I was like 14. And I'd come in, hammered, and he'd have the cigarette behind his back, and we'd start talking, and the smoke would just be blowing up behind his head. And it was an unspoken thing. I never called him on the cigarettes, and he never ratted me out for the drinking. But in those moments, in hours, we talked a lot about life, and it was that time frame when I was starting to have like a wider eye to the world and wider eyes to politics and social issues, and it was all being brought to me through music. And then, he would share his experiences about, his younger days in labor politics and stuff, and on the importance of solidarity and the importance of a lot of things in life. Everything that I learned and observed about being a man, frankly, my mother and my grandfather taught me. And so, we've written several songs about my grandfather. That was kind of like about his early life. And then we just wrote another one about his impact on my life as a whole and what he'd think if he saw me being called an artist,
Play the next song.
Well, the crooks, they work, we gotta work.
10 times more. You guys did 2 albums of Woody Guthrie songs, Oklahoma Rising and This Machine Still Kills Fascists. This Machine Still Kills Fascists. And you have this long history with Woody Guthrie and with the family. What was it like going into these archives and holding these lyric sheets?
So the first invite, well, the way we got to know the Guthrie family is in the early 2000s, we got a call from the director of the Guthrie Archives, which is Woody's daughter, Nora. And she said, hey, my son just turned me on to your band. He was an early teenager and he had the poster on the wall. And she said, who's that? She said, I think your father would appreciate some of the things these guys sing about. So we got the invite down. At the time, the archives were in New York. They're in Tulsa now. But I got to go down to New York, and now in Tulsa, you're looking at everything on a computer. You're not getting to touch the stuff. But in 2002, I believe it was, I got to go to New York and just looking through. Woody Guthrie has hundreds and hundreds of pages of lyrics that he never recorded, never got the opportunity to record due to his early sickness and death. And also at that, time, you didn't have an iPhone or something to record every idea on. So he writes a lyric, and I'm sure he knew what the intended music was, but he passed before he ever recorded it. So his family invites artists that they, look at me calling myself an artist now. They invite people down that they would like to have put music to his words. And I'm looking through these and they're not seeing the light of day because they're locked away. And so much of his lyrics were written during a time when America was really facing fascism during World War II. And it was so inspiring. And then he has songs about everything. And some are very deep. And then Woody also was a big proponent of, if a song is catchy, don't overcomplicate it. So some of his songs that are the most impactful just had one verse and one chorus. And one of those songs that had one verse and one chorus was called Shipping Up to Boston. And, in the midst of all these thought-provoking lyrics, I was like, what did he get drunk before he wrote this song? And typically when Dropkick Murphys are writing music, it's kind of like a collaborative thing. Either I'll write the lyrics and come in and sing it to the other guys, or we'll write it music and lyrics at the same time. We don't often write like start to finish arranged music. This is how it's going to go. Now we just need words. And we hadn't written words to it yet. And when I went down and saw that lyric, I knew it fit that music. And I often tell people, one of the keys to that song's success is you have the verse that happens quickly. The sail peg, lost my leg, climbing up the top sails, I lost my leg. And then the music goes instrumentally for a long time before you get to the payoff of the chorus, I'm shipping up to Boston. If I had written the lyrics to that song, I would have absolutely written a pre-chorus or some words to fill that big, what felt like an uncomfortably long gap. But there were no other lyrics. That's all there was. So we had to leave the gap. And I think that's kind of what makes that song unique and just kind of lends to its strengths. Also, it's only 2 minutes long, and people are like, do you ever get sick of that song? I'm like, no, thank God it wasn't 5 minutes long. It's only 2 minutes long. It's over before it starts. But ever since we went down to the archives that first time, we had talked with the family about doing an album of his lyrics. And if we had done it as a quick follow-up, it would have been electric. It would have been loud. God knows what songs we would have chosen. Fast forward to a few years back, and here we are in this climate we're in now, and we decided now's the time. And we went back down and looked at the lyrics. And I'm like, my God, if some of these songs were written 80, 90 years ago, and they could have been written yesterday sadly, about what's going on in the world now. And it just seemed like these words need to be brought to life right now. And so we did 2 acoustic albums of his songs. And the song you just played, 10 Times More, is about, when the crooks, they work, we got to work. When the robbers, they walk, we got to walk. Not once, not twice, 10 times more. And meaning that when the people in power that are trying to take away our rights, that are taking away everything that generations have worked for and fought for, that if we want to stand up to that, we need to be 10 times louder than them. So we can't stay silent. We can't whisper to our friends that we don't like it. We got to speak up loud. And not only does that fight the battle the right way, it inspires everyone else to speak up loud. As a musician, I think Dropkick Murphys can affect some change by speaking up and inspiring the fan base, but I want to inspire other bands. I almost want to guilt other bands into saying like, hey man, it's getting hot around here. These guys keep doing it and we're not. And so I don't think most of the people in this room need inspiration, but I would like to hopefully tell anyone that I can speak to that grow a spine, man. Stand up and speak up.
It takes a lot of courage to do that. What do you think the risk is?
I don't know. A lot of people sometimes say, do you wear a bulletproof vest on stage? And I'm like, really? I don't know. You know what? I put myself in a lot of risk throughout my life. I don't really think it takes a lot of courage. Not if you've been through some of the things that myself and a lot of people I know in this room have been through. I like to remind everyone we're dealing with mostly people. I've never liked the bully, so that alone is motivation to speak up louder. And I've also like to realize this is to me, it's a large and very loud minority of the country who wants what these people are pushing. So I know that what Dropkick Murphys is doing right now, what I'm doing, is the right thing to do. And that's what matters the most.
The 5th and last song we're going to listen to is from the new album.
Throughout centuries in every country, we faced the wrath and felt the pain. The tyrant's sword and the henchman's boot for another rich man's gain. In the endless quest for wealth and power, they stomp us down with great disdain. Beneath the false god's banner, in the name of all that's vain. Through crime and crusade, our labor it's been stolen. We've been robbed of our freedom. We've been held down and beholden to the bosses and the bankers who never gave their share of any blood, of any sweat, of any tears.
So we've been talking politics, but 29 years in, do you ever just get a chance to sit back and hear this music and think about starting with The Clash and everything that's happened since then and realize this band still kicks so much ass?
I can honestly tell you, I've never said that. I do often, approaching 30 years as a band, go, how the hell did that happen? We've applied the same political principles and speaking up on behalf of what's right for 30 years. Message has never changed. Neither is the haircut. We've also applied the same principles of just how you treat people. When we roll up to a venue, the people that work there, from the stagehands to the people backstage, they want to see us because we treat them with respect. That old classic old statement, they'll remember you on the way down too. And maybe that's part of the reason that we ain't on the way down yet. We just try to carry ourselves the way we would in charity work or in just treating friends. And we've never really been a part of the music industry. We've always just kind of operated on our own. I often make the analogy, if throughout the years the music industry was the highway, and then that little like dirt road that sometimes runs beside the highway. Did you see the one? We were always on that, right? And, you know, for years, the major labels, wow, going right by us, and we're just putting along, you know? But it's true, slow and steady, true. And then the music industry totally changed, and everyone wanted to be off the highway, over on that little road where they knew their fans, and you know what I mean? They had a family and that's what Dropkick Murphys, the band itself, and the greater community around the band has always been family. That's what it's all about for us.
As you've done for many years, you guys have been playing at protests. This year, you also, as you've done for many years, spoke out for veterans. Can you talk a little bit about the work you guys have done on behalf of veterans?
Yeah, you know, before we start, so the band has a charity foundation, the Clatter Fund. We help with children's charities, veterans-related causes, and substance abuse. Shout out to all my people in the recovery community here tonight. We're always inspired by veterans because I like to tell the story. For a long part of our career, we had a manager from Australia. She was our original promoter in Australia. And we went down there for the first time in 1998. And we were with her for a week. And she promoted and managed big Australian bands. She brought us down there, and we were in a van. We were driving all night. She loaded, and I never saw her sleep for a week. And we talked her into moving to America and managing the band. And she had a very strong opinion of the American military industrial complex. And after a few years of managing us, she said, I have to say, the veterans support Dropkick Murphys so much, but they're one of the few groups of people usually when you get a letter or an email, you know, just human nature, more often than not, it's a complaint. She said, I have yet to see a veteran ever have a complaint when they're contacting the Dropkick Murphys. They're always just saying thank you. And that was always just inspiring to us. So we've always kind of stood shoulder to shoulder with veterans. We played a veterans protest on the, what do you call it, the National Mall with the Capitol in the backdrop a few months ago, and that was very inspiring to be able to show up and stand with them, and we'll show up to any protest. So you having some type of protest, call us. We'll be there.
This is my last question. We've called tonight in the archives with Ken Case, and we've talked about you actually being in archives. We've gone through the things that you've done throughout your life and throughout your music. We had a quote at the bottom of the steps when you walk in from our friend, Dr. Amy Richter, who passed away this year. And she said that the archive was what you saved for the future. It was what you thought you were going to need. When you look at this work, when you look at this music, what do you hope a future generation, when they find it, takes from the work of Dropkick Murphys?
I always did come at it from, and obviously I think this was the inspiration of Irish music and folk music in general, is going back centuries ago. That's how you passed on the story of what came before you. And I think a song, and now in this day and age, tweets, truths, you know, news flashes, they come at you so fast and furious. But a song sits with you, and that song can stay with you. And hopefully that song gets passed on to the next generation. I don't know what impact Dropkick Murphys music will have on the next generation. I do know that when they tell the story of the band, hopefully they'll say, hopefully we'll be more known in the end for what we did and how we carried ourselves than what the music was. So that's what's most important to us.
Thank you for doing that. 2025 Storyteller of the Year, the artist Ken Casey.
Can we get one more? Hell yeah!